My name's Charlotte Sloan. I'm a Senior International Education Advisor for our group schools. I'm hopefully going to see a lot of those I work with on the call. It'd be lovely to see you. I work to support our schools, as it mentions there, in groups as the education advisor. That means I support with training, data consultations, onboarding, and sort of insights into education in general. So that's why Emma and I are working on this today, and hopefully we can give you some tips and tricks. Following on from the webinar, if you did join our colleagues Kat and Kate a few weeks ago, super insightful, lovely first-hand information from a school there that's had success themselves. Emma and I were really just hoping to give you some tips and tricks to help you better understand the accelerated reader and myON. If you're interested in that, maybe it'll solidify some thinking for you and you might want to give that a try. Or similarly, you might use it already and might just want to find out what else you could be doing to maximize it. So yeah, that's me.
And my name's Emma. I'm one of the international education advisors. I do exactly the same job as Charlotte, but for single schools, essentially. So some of you on the call I already know, actually, as I've been looking at the attendees list. So hello, everybody. But yeah, I come from an international education background as well, and was a teacher in Southeast Asia and Europe for about 8 years. So hopefully we'll both have something helpful that might be relevant to you today, that you can take away with when using Star, Accelerated Reader, and myON.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something a little bit bittersweet about this is that I didn't get the privilege of using, I've used many of our suite across my teaching career, but I didn't have the privilege of using Accelerated Reader and myON. And as someone who's passionate about the teaching of reading, as a primary practitioner, I just really wish that I had these tools. And every time I do demonstrate them
Same.
or maximize, help schools maximize the use of them, I just think, gosh, how amazing these would have been for
How
me to be able to use.
helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's dive right in. So we've got a little poll for you actually. We're just out of interest, we want to know what you sort of think the average reading age of an adult is. This is sort of a worldwide range. Just interested to see what you think. Please let us know.
So you should have a poll that's come up on screen now. You just want to start adding in your answers, just for a little information gathering.
Hmm. I do wonder when we did this last time, Emma, if people think 17 is the maximum age on there.
Mm,
That's an interesting in itself.
mm. Are we able to see people's answers coming in on the poll, Terry?
Lovely, thank you so much.
Ah, amazing. Thank you. Okay, interesting. So we've got Charlotte, do you want to take over? Because I know you had something about you had something that
Well,
we were discussing yesterday about the 9 to 11 years old.
yeah, so interestingly, the correct answer is 12 to 14, but actually only just marginally. This is something that when Emma and I were preparing for our coffee mornings in Southeast Asia earlier this year, we obviously were doing our research, and this is a statistic we came across. The average reading age of an adult is 12 to 14 years old. However, that was with 40% of the sample. There is 30% of the sample falls within the 9 to 11-year-old bracket. So for those of you that voted 9 to 11, you're not far off. And actually, it's something that Emma and I found quite stark when we were doing that research. And I think it just what we tried to take that on as is yes, it's quite surprising and quite shocking, but also a lot of people really emphasize the importance of, or maybe focus too heavily on reading age. And actually, what we really want to focus on is the skill of reading in itself. And rather than what is typical for an age of a child, really just broadening and deepening their understanding of reading as a skill. And hopefully we can raise that age together
Yep.
worldwide for sure.
And in the UK, it was actually 9 to 11 years old as well, wasn't
Mm.
it?
Hmm.
So depending on the country that you're talking about, it's going to be different. But ultimately, it is much lower than people, think it is. But
Mm.
just like Charlotte said there, we are consistently looking to get our students' reading ages higher when realistically, a lot of, adults, that's not necessarily the
Mm.
case for them. So as much
Hmm.
as we want to be aiming higher and higher for our reading ages, this is something that shows you that on an average, that might not be the expectation that sort of is required later on in
Mm.
life. So just something to think about as we move through the webinar.
So, the webinar. Let's get to that. So, like I said before, hopefully today we're just going to give you some tips and tricks on how to maximize myON and accelerated reader. We are going to reference star reading, but as many of you will know, if you do, if you are familiar with star reading, it's an assessment. It gives you a wealth of data and information, but it's not a practical classroom tool, much like myON and accelerated reader. So there's not any tips and tricks we can give you with star reading. Obviously, with it being an assessment, but we can hopefully give you some idea of how to maximize your use of these other platforms. What we want to sort of work on is the third bullet point down, that building learner confidence and the independence is really, really key, I think, when we're talking about reading. We're focusing quite a lot today on sort of an older audience for reading. And that's, I think, because a lot of us in schools internationally, we find that we have older children who, younger students who have a low reading level are getting a lot of that intervention constantly. They're either in a phonics intervention scheme, they're learning phonics because you are in reception year one, year two, potentially in year three, we're still learning phonics. And we have those explicit reading lessons. It's more challenging in secondary and further education because you perhaps don't have that dedicated time. And so we're hoping to be able to just show you different ways. And if we look at bullet point two, that element of adapting texts, tasks, and questioning to suit all of your readers, despite what level they're at, what range they're reading within. And we really want to maximize that for you.
As you'll see, though, this can go across key stages. So it's way
Mhm.
obvious. The texts that we're going to be focusing on are going to be mostly sort of higher level. However, these methods can apply for any key stage for primary or secondary as well. So
Absolutely.
you should be able to get something from it, regardless.
So we just thought we'd start. This is how we started our coffee morning earlier this year, and we just thought it was really nice. If you just give a little bit of thought to a significant reading memory of yours, it could be a book that made you fall in love with reading, or an experience that made reading a challenge for you. We realize that not everyone on this call is maybe loves reading themselves. You can know that it's important for the kids and for your students, but perhaps you have quite a tumultuous relationship with reading, and sometimes you like it and sometimes you don't. So I would like to just give you a little second to think about your first memory or a significant memory for you that maybe changed things or impacted you in a big way.
Yep, so you can have a think about it, or you can post it in the chat if you want to. We are going to ask you to post in the chat in a minute, so we don't need it to be sort of full of things. But one of the examples that myself thought of at the coffee morning last year was I always remember reading the book "It's a Cold Day Today, Jane" with my mum when I was a kid, because Jane would get progressively hotter throughout the book, and then at the end of the day, she was shouting in the street that she was boiling hot because her mum had made her put on all these clothes. So that's one of the things that, that's one of those like significant reading memories that I have from being a young person.
We had a really lovely one. I'm hoping the gentleman that joined us at our coffee morning won't mind me sharing. But he said that he really never enjoyed reading all through primary school. His teachers could not get him to sit down and engage with any texts. And then unfortunately, he suffered a sports injury when he was a teenager, and it meant that he was sort of bedbound for a little while. And he said he came across an autobiography of a cricketer, I think it was. And he read the autobiography and he said it just changed his world. He was like, I can't believe that I've not been doing this all this time. And so it could have been that it's come to you in a much later stage, your love for reading, and that really unlocked it for him. So it's not to say that it doesn't happen when just because you're putting books in front of kids at, three, four, five earlier, it doesn't mean that they're going to love it. And sometimes you have to find your way in.
So you might have had to think about that then. And obviously, we're going to try and sort of move on relatively quickly throughout the webinar. But one of the things that you might have done just then is you've probably thought about your, significant reading experience in your first language. So for those of you who have learned a second language, I'm going to make a prediction here and say that that wasn't the reading memory that popped into your mind. However, when we're thinking about students who are learning English as an additional language, then we might, you can imagine that their memories or their significant sort of moments with reading were potentially sort of, not as lovely and heartwarming and maybe a little bit frustrating and a little bit difficult. So as
Mhm.
much as we love reading and as much as, as adults, we kind of are trying to encourage our students to read as much as possible, we do also have to put that on as an added caveat. We're not asking the students to read in their first language. So it does make it that little bit more difficult and that little bit
Mm.
more frustrating, especially if you're already familiar with reading in your own language and you already enjoy it. It can be sort of that extra barrier is a bit can be a bit off-putting sometimes. So from there, we're going to move on and ask you what we've called the EAL reality check. So obviously, what I've just described is that when you are asking students to read in a language that is not theirs or something like not their first language, the story kind of changes. So we just want you to put into the chat now what you think are the biggest challenges for your EEL and ESL learners. So at this moment, we'll invite you to just add into the chat just a couple of words, a sentence, just describing what you think the students struggle with the most when it comes to reading when they are from an EAL or ESL background. And we're just
Mm.
going to sort of get like a few ideas from yourselves. Connecting with the text, yeah, that's an excellent one actually. Me and Charlotte did
Mm.
a bit of a workshop on that in Vietnam and Thailand at the beginning of the year about not being able to see themselves in the text, about windows, mirrors, and
Mm.
doors. Um, oh, that's a lovely one. My mum would read Beatrix Potters to me, which is also how I learned to speak English, which was a great one.
I also used to read the Beatrix Potters and also
Mm,
the Magic Faraway Tree. If anyone has that in their mind, that's my core memory as a child.
yeah. So we're getting a lot of, yeah,
Cultural
cultural
relevance,
reference. Yep.
absolutely. Age
Like,
appropriate, yes.
mm,
Yeah.
preconceived ideas about the level of the text. That's an interesting one as
Hmm.
well. Cultural relevance, age appropriate books.
Lack of background knowledge. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to address some of these throughout the session today. And I'm going to shamelessly plug our workshop, Emma, that Emma and I delivered, as she just mentioned, in Thailand and Vietnam. But I am coming to Malaysia later this year with our colleague Chris, and we're going to be delivering the same workshop. So hopefully we can see some of you in Malaysia. I'm also going to be delivering that in Hong Kong. So fingers crossed we can see you there as well to
Yeah,
unpick these even more.
yeah. Decoding the text, the level and the amount of,
Availability, yeah.
yeah, availability of text. Yeah. So as you can see, there's quite a
Mm,
lot going on when it comes to sort of the EAL side. Whether or not you're trying to get your students to read is sort of only part of the picture when
mhm.
realistically it can be sort of quite a large issue that
I think
doesn't
that
just in
something
yeah. Mhm.
that Laura's just mentioned there in that chat is understanding the words but never asking the meaning of them. And I think often we can
Mm,
take fluency of reading, we can mistake fluency for understanding often,
hmm.
especially with older children. If they're quite fluent in how they can read the speed, the intonation, and how it sounds, we mistake that sometimes from also knowing what it says. And it's sometimes really important to differentiate that. So thank you, Laura.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, guys, for that. There's
Mm,
very, very varied responses. So one of the thing, a few things that we came up with when we were doing these workshops was in EAL, the reading success depends on a few things. So we've got right level, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So we do believe here at Renaissance that finding the right level of books for the students is probably going to be the key that unlocks a lot of
mm,
your students' readings, the right language load, the right motivation, and the right data at the right time, which is again something that we heavily focus on here at Renaissance. So if any of these is missing, then it becomes a task. And we even feel
mm,
that as teachers. So if when you are in the middle of something and you're just trying to get the students to connect, to comprehend, it can feel more like you're just sort of trying to tick boxes rather than
mm.
trying to get them to love reading. So we really need to be focusing on all four of these things in order to sort of ensure that our EAL students are going to not only succeed but enjoy the reading as well.
Mm. So, how many of us perhaps have gotten to the end of a lesson? Not every lesson, but we might have got to the end of a lesson and thought, gosh, why didn't the students understand the text that I put in front of them, or the book, or the extract? or the worksheet or the word problem. And we're in a position where we're having to now react rather than be proactive. So, how do we adapt the text to improve comprehension, engagement, and independence? That's something we really need to drive for here is that you don't have unlimited adult resources within and across your classrooms. I was really privileged to have a TA full time in my first school when I was living in Romania, and then when I moved to my second school in the UAE, we had a few TAs that we shared across a year group, and so you didn't have the consistency of knowing that you always had an adult in your room to support you with differentiating your teaching to all of your students. And I'm sure that's the case for many of you, and some of you will not have a teaching assistant or a learning support assistant at all. And so, how do we get to encourage the independence, improve our comprehension and the engagement? And hopefully, Emma and I are gonna give you some tips on that today. So, like I said, instead of asking why didn't students understand this text worksheet word problem, could we ask what might stop the students from accessing this now, and how can I remove that barrier in advance? And hopefully, that's what we're going to show you.
Being proactive rather than reactive, as we love to
Exactly.
say. We love to say. So, how do you guys find the right level of your text? So, just have a think for a minute. Again, we're not going to ask you to share in the chat because we don't want people to feel like, oh, I'm not sure. But what do you do at the moment to find the right level of the text for your student, and how are you
Mhm.
ensuring that your students have access to this range of books within their reading range? And how do the students know what their reading range is? Is it something that is communicated with the student on a sort of like termly basis? Is it something that you just tell them at the beginning of the year and then that's what they sit with? They know I go with yellow books, I go with blue books. So just having a
Mm.
think about like what it is that you do in your school in order to find the right level of books for the students at the moment, because they need to know where to start somewhere. Here at
Mm.
Renaissance, some of you may or may not know, we do have the STAR reading assessment, which gives us the zone of proximal development. Now, this is a reading range which shows you the difference between what a student can do with support and without support, and also puts them on that sort of middle ground, that ZPD, that just right range of texts for that student to be able to read, but also make progress onto that sort of higher level of reading, that next level of their ZPD, that upper range. So when we think when just to give you a visualization, sorry, of what this looks like, if we have when we do our star reading assessment, it will give you a numbered ZPD, this reading range. So every book has an ATOS number, according to our accelerated reader program, and this, as you can see on the screen, this student has a ZPD, a reading range of 4.8 to 8.9. So they've done the STAR assessment, and this is the reading range that it has come out with.
Mm.
Now, this the student does not have to start at the bottom and end at the top. They can read anywhere from within this range at any time. We do recommend that students are reading at least 60% of the time within their reading range, as this is when we've seen the most progress between those sort of termly STAR assessments.
Mhm.
Another thing that you want to take into consideration as well, which our books do have on Accelerated Reader, is the interest level. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But when it comes to our books on Accelerated Reader, we have lower years, middle years plus, and upper years. So you
Mm.
might have a text that is a lower level, but is appropriate more by its content for an upper years student.
Mm.
So all of our texts on Accelerated Reader are sort of marked by this scale. They're given an ATOS number and a interest level, and then the students from the STAR assessment are given this reading range, which they can read, they can find texts within. Now, that's how it works for us.
So let's have a little bit of fun with this now. So what we would like you to do is, and this is to one of the points one of you raised earlier, is that perception of level of book for students. So could you just choose a child at random, A, B, or C, as is the example at the bottom there, and then just tell us the book that you would choose with it for that range. For anyone that's not used a ZPD range before, the lower the number, the lower the reading ability of that child, and the higher the number, the higher the ability. So just quick ideas would be great. as we've shown, we said maybe A could be the elephant's child, child A. So
So
any
yeah,
ideas would be great. Just throw them in.
if you just want to pop that into the chat, it can be student B could be more appropriately reading the BFG. You might think that that's what is going to be best for
Mm.
them. So any ideas of which book you think should go with which student
Hmm.
would
Thank
be
you.
very, very helpful. You just pop them into the chat whenever you're ready. We're not trying to catch anyone out
Yeah, no,
either.
there's no right and
This,
wrong. Well, there is right and
yeah.
wrong, but we're not gonna shame you. Don't worry.
Yes, exactly. So
Oh, we've got
B,
two
Roald
ideas there.
Dahl.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, you can just put in one idea as well if you want,
Hmm.
just to be fast. C, Hunger Games, perfect, amazing. Do we have any more answers? Just anyone brave enough to sort of share in the chat what they think, what book they think might go with what student, with which student? I think that's not a
That's
bad,
a not a bad shout.
not a bad guess. Not a bad guess.
Does anyone disagree with our our suggestion or example on child A, C, Romeo and Juliet?
Darkman, B, C,
Thank
Romeo and
you.
Juliet. Yeah. Okay.
Great. Let's have a little look. So first of all, we're going to run in with what if all of these kids are in year nine? Um, so does that change which book you'd allocate to which student profile if they're all in the same year group?
Mm.
So that's really important. And again, goes back to that interest level that Emma was mentioning before.
And
And
also,
then,
just for
yeah,
a bit of context, all of these students are in year nine. So all
yeah.
of these reading ranges are from year nine students. So it might, yeah, like Charlotte's just said, it might be that a year nine student doesn't want to be seen reading The Elephant's Child. It doesn't
Mm.
matter, regardless of the reading range. However,
As we sort
the
of said, yeah. As Emma really well, really expertly described earlier, we've got our books with our ATOS levels and then also the interest levels. And what we're trying to do, give you an example of, is within the platform of myON and within our book guide with Accelerated Reader, our book finder, sorry, you're able to find books with a really low level, as is Darkman just right here, but with a really high interest level. And why is that important? Well, it's important because, as Emma's just said, your children in year nine who are reading at a really low range do not want to be reading Vanishing Cream. You do not want to have to send your learning support team down to primary school to elementary to pick up books for your children in your upper school. We know that that doesn't feel good. It didn't feel good for my year sixes or my year fives if I had to go down to Key Stage 1 and collect them books. So we can only imagine that stark difference for our secondary learners. We can facilitate, at least in this example, we've got many examples. This is not the only example. We've got loads of high content, low level books within the platform. And if you are not using myON, but you do want to use Accelerated Reader, you can use the book find in Accelerated Reader to identify those books within your physical library as well. So it's not just exclusive to the platform. So
yeah,
it's really important that we're able to provide a reading level to children that's also going to be hopefully somewhat interesting for them.
yeah. And a bunch of 13-year-old boys might not necessarily want to read Vanishing Green, but might
Get
might
together
feel
as
might
a
feel all
group
right
read.
reading Dark Man in front of
A
their
little bit better.
friends.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what we sort of want to then go on to is that reminder that reading is a universal skill and it's consistent across cultures, contexts, and curricula. It does not matter where we all come from, what curriculum we're studying, what age our children are. We're all driving for the same universal skill that is reading. We want to be fluent, passionate readers. And I'm aware that there's a plethora of other curricula that are not on this screen, so I'm by no means excluding any curriculum. I just wanted to show you a really quick example of here we have the national curriculum for England and two outcomes from that curriculum. For Key Stage 2, making comparisons within and across books. Key Stage 3, making critical comparisons across text. Sounds super similar, right? We know what it looks like in reading. We're slowly developing that skill, and it's slightly in more depth and a bit more of a critical analysis. Both Emma and I did English at A level as well, and I studied English as part of my degree. And so we know that it's all very similar skills, but you just are doing them on a deeper level. And then similarly within IB at NYP, we're looking at comparing and contrasting texts and connections across texts. At DP, we're looking at intertextuality, so how texts connect with reference or reinterpret or reshape one another. So hopefully we're going to sort of take you through a journey of if you're a teacher of reading, which hopefully many of you are, or you need students to be engaged with reading, we're all working on the same thing here. We're all working from the same hymn sheet, really. And so, how do we achieve that with these tools? So, myON is, as we mentioned, a fantastic resource, and I really wish, like I said, I'd had this at my fingertips in my class. If you're using a text such as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is one of the core texts across secondary or A level, or so at least it was when Emma and I were in school, which sort of gives away our age, but it could still be there. I think it could be.
Don't tell everyone.
Um, but what you have here are three different versions of the same book. Now, this is really important. Yes, you've got the core text, the original text, this one on the far right. But you're going to have children in your class whose reading range is much lower. And so, how do we engage those children? How do we provide them with that independence that means that they can still engage with the story and engage with you in the classroom? Now, again, those outcomes are going to be the outcomes we saw previously are really going to determine how you're interacting with the students within that lesson. Some lessons are going to really need you to look at the original text because you need them to be engaging with the original content. However, there will be some themes and some questions that you can ask the students whilst engaging with those easier or lower level texts. And it means that everybody can contribute and everybody has a point of access and a point of relevance that they can come into that lesson with and engage with you at a point that is appropriate for them.
myON's excellent for this as well because we've heard from a lot of teachers in when we were in Southeast Asia, a lot of the students are into comics and
Mm,
a lot of our core texts or the texts that turn up on our curriculums are actually made into comic books in
mm,
myON. So as you can see on the far left-hand side, this is not a full comic, but is a full picture book. So it is exactly the same story as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but it's just got illustrations in it that are going to help sort of the students who are that lower level that who can
mm,
read that ATOS level of 3.3. It's going to help them understand the text a bit more and contextualize it.
mhm.
So like Charlotte says, it's giving everybody access to the text at every level.
And then we've just got more examples for you. We've got great expectations here. Um, in this context, we've got the middle range book has more of the images. And also, if we're going back to those outcomes, we're also making critical comparisons across text. Why aren't the children reading all versions? Or maybe they're not reading all versions because you don't have time for that, but they can read extracts from each version, compare the vocabulary used or the intent of the author or what different language or different, what am I trying to say? Emotive language is used and why does it look like that or why does it read this way in this book versus this book. So we're still being able to do that across again that different range, and again your kids can be in groups together and still engaging very equally. Some of your students are going to be really good at verbalizing their thoughts and thinking critically, but they just don't quite have the language yet to be able to read at the same level that they can speak or think at. And so again it's going to be really helpful.
And some of your students might be able to access the higher level version of the book at the beginning, but some of your students might really,
Mm,
really struggle, and forcing them to read the higher level of the book from the get-go is just going to result in failure. So getting them to start at a lower level version of the book is going to help you actually get them to understand what it is that they're going to have to understand, they're going to have to read in the future.
mm.
Yeah, we've also got
And
different, sorry, go on.
more examples. Yeah, just more examples. We've got picked some in some cases, so we also don't want to lead you down a path of every book is three. There aren't three versions of every text within myON. Sometimes it's two versions, but again, it's a lovely difference between the upper range and the lower range. So you still are able to find a sweet spot for most of your kids.
And it's all the same story, isn't it,
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
It's all just, yeah,
And
just
then
simplified.
we have myON News, which is a fantastic resource. This is an add-on you can get for myON. It's got articles. I'm sure it's been mentioned to you before. Articles updated every day. I think it's five a day,
Yeah,
Emma?
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, five a day. And they come in three different access levels. So as you can see, you've got early years, middle years, and upper years. You also have different accessibility options. You can change the language, not to every language, but there's a good list of them there. You can adjust the text size, and obviously you can have that audible function as well. But this is again just a really nice example of if you're engaging children with non-fiction, they can access that at three different levels, and you can find something appropriate for the students.
It might be 5 a week, but I can't remember now. I'm gonna have to double check that afterwards. You've put a question into my mind now,
Yeah.
Charlotte.
I feel
Yeah.
like it's a few a day at the very
It's a
least.
lot.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
lot. Yeah.
It's a lot, everyone.
But as you can see there as well, like the text is different on every single
Mhm.
for every single age group. So it's all the same basic sort of idea, but it's different levels of language. So
Yeah.
it again, if even if you've got a student who even if you've got a student who might not be able to access the upper years version of the news, then they will be able to access maybe the middle or the early years, but they're going to get the same context of the
Information.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, what might stop students from accessing this text is the question we asked earlier. So hopefully we've now removed the barrier of they've got a lower reading range than their peers. We've removed that one. We've shown you there's three different versions of the text. So we know that's not the only barrier to learning for our children. That's not ever the only barrier to learning for in education. But we're hoping to start to remove some of these. So how can we remove the other barriers? I'm now going to hand over to Emma, and Emma's going to do a little demonstration of some other features within myON that we think could be useful for some of your learners, whether they are needing stretch and challenge or whether they need support wherever they are in your classroom. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and allow Emma to share.
Thank you. I've just had to send a request, so we'll see when that comes through. Hopefully that'll be able to be shared. Can everybody see my screen? Oh, it's logged
Yeah,
itself
all
out.
good.
That's fine. There we go. Back in. Okay, so I'm just going to go into my own now. So I've picked a book. I've picked Oliver Twist. I'll go back just out of it and I'll show you where I found that. So I'm just going to have a look at my search option and I'm going to just type in Oliver Twist. And I want to find a version of the book. I'm just going to go for the first version that I find. But as you can see, as we mentioned before, there are a few different versions, a few different levels as well. But I'm going to go for this one on the far left-hand side. So from the get-go, what you might notice is that we do have the ability to play an guided audio, and I'm just going to make sure that I have my sound shared. Da, 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 da. Let's see if this will work. Are you able to hear that, Charlotte?
No.
That's frustrating.
But it's we know that we can describe it maybe, so we're not
Yeah,
um
that's fine.
but yeah, but
That's fine.
essentially the story will be read to the child, so the
Yeah.
child's able to hear a fluent
So,
English
yeah.
speaking voice,
So
basically.
basically, you'll be able to hear this child will be able to hear the story read out to them. You also have the option to be able to speed up and slow this down. So this will be really, really helpful for any of those students who aren't able to sort of keep up with the text by themselves and might want that text read out to them. The text is also highlighted. So as you can see,
Hmm. This is really helpful as well if the kids are going home and then perhaps their families don't speak English as a first language or they feel intimidated by engaging with text themselves. A student is able to go home and listen to a story read to them fluently, and it sort of takes a bit of that pressure off the family and the parents. If that's something that they're not super comfortable with, which is something I've experienced in the past myself, and it's absolutely
mhm,
fair enough.
absolutely. And with that, with the ability to highlight whilst it's being read out, then the students are able to sort of focus in on that pronunciation. When
Mhm.
you go to the settings, like I said before, you're able to slow down and speed up the audio. So if they really wanted to, they can be instructed on how to slow down the audio, how to really focus in on the pronunciation of a specific word. If they've
Mhm.
got something, for example, that they're looking at, I'll stop this. Get rid of that. So, for example, if they've got a few words in the book that they might not necessarily be comfortable with, or they are trying to read through and then they're going to look back through and listen to the audio, then they can use their highlighter tool to highlight the words that they're struggling with. So maybe my student is struggling with the past simple and the ed sound, so they just want to highlight words where they want to listen to it. You have a lot of students who'll say stop it, if for example, or
Mhm.
they might just be looking for example words that they have never come across before. So brought, nobody. So you can use the highlighter tool, or the students can use the highlighter tool to obviously go through and pick out words that they might want to remember and they might want to copy down later. So when it comes to this as well, one of the things that the students can do is they can use the dictionary to type in the word, and find the definition of the word as well. So we've got a few different ones in here at the moment. We don't have all the languages available, but if a student wants to find out a translation, they're able to. We can see obviously I've got the word bring has come up here as the as the present simple of the word brought, but I might want to find out what's a wedding, for example, and I get the description of the word there. So the dictionary feature is going to be very, very helpful for students who are completely new to English. So that could be something that the students are going to use or might want to look into. Another option is as well, if they've got new words that they want to remember, then they can write it into their journal. Now, this journal is going to spread across the entirety of their myON. So when they open up the journal in a new book, sorry, they're going to see the same entries. So this one might be for Oliver Twist. However, I might want to have a new entry for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then I might want to find the words from there. Now, what I would have done if I was teaching English still as a foreign language or as an additional language is I would have encouraged my students to add in a translation where they can. So if that's going to help them, if that's going to help them having a record of the words that they've learned from the text, then getting the words from the text and then adding them in and putting a translation, I think is a very, very handy, quick way to sort of keep track of the new words that they are coming across and what they actually mean. So, like I said, the dictionary, the journal, we've also got different highlighter tools as well. So you've got circles, arrows, squares, and things like that. But also one of the things that the students are able to do is they're able to record themselves. So get rid of that. It's not coming up on my page at the moment. I don't have it on here for some unknown reason, but there is the option as well to record themselves reading the page.
Do you
So
need to
if
go in
they
as the student, or is it just not on that book? Like,
let's go in as you. No, I'm
yeah.
not sure why it's not coming up at the moment, but there is the option to record the students to record themselves reading, and then also they're able to hit save, and then you can listen back to the recordings as well. And this should be an option that's available on the majority of books. So Charlotte very rightly has just reminded me as well there that I can go in as a student. So I'll return and show you how to do that. I'm currently on as a teacher, but I want to go in and read the book as a student. Now, if you have a student, for example, who's really struggling, or you have a student who has SEN needs, or a student who is quite low at the English level, you can go in and you might not do this for every single student, but you want to do this for a couple that you want to give that little bit more of a push to. So I'm going to go in as one of my students. So I'll go in as Emmeline. And now I'm going to highlight to her that I want her to take a look at this picture while she's reading through this text. So I'm going to put on there a little note, a little arrow, and then I can add a sticky note if I want to. Hmm. But yeah, so that would be something that you can close then as well. And then when
Mhm.
Emmeline goes in, she's able to see the annotations that you have made on the text. So if you just do want to, if you think that someone's going to struggle with a certain word or with a certain paragraph, then you can go in and you can add these annotations to that student's book to make sure that they're really focusing in on something, or to allow them even to know that you're sort of like looking out for them and that you're trying to give them that little nudge in like
Mhm.
the right direction.
Yeah, I think another really the highlighter tool for me, I think as a teacher would have been great for this. I would have liked to have gone in and highlighted the words that I think I'd like you to focus on in this lesson. So I've given them a dictionary, I've highlighted some words. Please go through, read the sentences, find the words in context, add the words to your journal, and then define them. That could be an activity in and of itself. Some of you might be sat now thinking that's great, but I have to do that for many children within my classroom. So what could I do instead? So another solution could be adding your learning support assistant as a student within your class. Go in and do the annotations, highlight the keywords, add any post-it notes or communications you want to have with your learning support assistant. Then when they open the book, they're going to see all of your notes, and then they can go around and support their students. If they're working one to small group with any children in your classroom, they will be able to do that. And similarly, if you're sharing a learning support assistant across a year group and you're all studying the same text, it means that they have those notes for every classroom and you can agree on them as a team. Or those of you that are planning English or reading that term can agree on sort of what support the learning support team will be providing. And that can be their book that they sort of engage with. And they can keep a journal themselves and make notes as well that they're able to communicate with you later in terms of the engagement of the students or fluency or what words they struggled with reading, etc. So
They
there's
can,
different options that are really
they,
useful.
the teaching assistant can keep it in their own journal, can't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, a great idea. But yeah, so that's some of the ways in which you're able to sort of remove some of those extra barriers while you're dealing with your EAL students or while you're encouraging them to read. So I'll stop sharing now and I'll just hand back over to Charlotte.
Fab. Thank you. So let me bring this back up. Hopefully we can see that. So as we've just mentioned, we mentioned previously about reading being a universal skill. We're now going to give you a little bit of a demo of what we would do if we were teaching at that upper secondary level. So again, you might be thinking, right, okay, well, the theme for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was when we've done this book, explore the relationship between Jekyll and Hyde. How does Stevenson explore the dual nature of mankind? Thinking about that good and evil coexisting, that respectable appearance versus inner corruption. How do we get every child in our classroom, despite their range of reading ability, to engage with these really serious and important sort of conundrums and thoughts? Because this doesn't just appear within this text. This is something that you're probably talking to your kids about a lot, whether it's their social media presence versus how they are at home versus how they are with their friends. Like people have different personalities, they have different versions of themselves that they present to different people. And so this isn't just applicable here, but it can be applicable across their lives and across school. And so, again, children have got varying reading ranges. How are we teaching this? So, again, just a reminder, we have those three different versions of texts. And then I'm going to hand over to you again, Emma.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, just as Charlotte said, I will try to share my screen now.
Sorry.
Yep.
Stop sharing.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, all good.
Yep. So just as Charlotte mentioned, obviously everybody's going to have everyone's going to have these standards that they have to hit, and the skills that we have to teach the students don't really sort of they change from year to year, but they more develop. But obviously we all know as teachers from an EAL perspective, you might have you might have students in one class. One of them is currently sitting at sort of key stage 2 ability, and the other one's sitting key
Mm,
stage 3. That's how stark the difference can be. That's how vast the difference can be. So one thing that you can do, obviously, by using these multiple versions of these texts is you can set assignments as well on myON. So what I've done here is I've taken the versions that we have of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I've made two versions. Now, one I've made for a Key Stage 2 student, and the other I've made for Key Stage 3 students. Now, obviously, you could do three versions of the sort of same lesson, run it through AI, and create different questions for the different key stages, but based on the same curriculum standard. So the first one here, I've just called Jekyll and Hyde, quite simple. This has got the lower level version of the book. If I go in, you can see that I've got a few different tasks. So I've got some instructions on what the students need to do. And then I've got activities underneath. So I've put in a writing activity, which is that they just need to give me 150 words answering one of the questions below. Like I say, I've already ran this through AI and asked it to give me questions that are Key Stage 2 level. And I've also got questions that are Key Stage 3 level above as well. So this is going to be, these are going to be skills that a Key Stage 2 student should be able to do. You can do the same thing with CEFR levels,
mhm.
and you could have a different assignment for the different CEFR levels that the students have, or you could do the same thing with their ZPDs. So I'll show you in a second, we've actually created groups based on the student's ZPD range as well. So I've got a writing response and I've also got an oral response. Now, these are based on the two themes that Charlotte was talking about earlier. So we've got appearance, and we've got appearance versus inner self, and then we've got good versus evil as well. So I've got a writing response for that and an oral response for the other. And then I've got at the bottom a custom activity, which I've got across both assignments. So you can see here that the questions are relatively simple. How does Dr. Jekyll seem to other people at the start of the story? What is different about Mr. Hyde compared to Dr. Jekyll? So this is for the assignment called Jekyll and Hyde. Now, if I just save this as a draft and go to the other one, so this is our slightly higher level version of the same assignment. I've got two slightly higher level books. So the students are able to choose one of the texts to read as well. Or you can obviously just take one of them out and make them read just the highest level one. And then the assignments underneath, sorry, the tasks that I've got underneath are essentially the same, but a little bit more complex. So I've got write at least 400 words. And then how does Stevenson present the contrast between Jekyll's public reputation and his private desires? So the question is more complex. However, it's focusing on the same skill. So you might have you might have students in your class who are not going to understand the use of this language, but you might have students who will. So you might
Mhm.
as well have two. If you're going to be focusing on the same text, then you might as well be able to make it accessible for every student by just changing the language of the question around. And then I've put at the bottom again the same custom um, activity so that all the students can come together at the end and they can do the same activity in class. We've got in your groups, find quotes from the book Jekyll and Hyde and prepare them for our in-class Who Said It game. Now, this could be something, obviously, the students are going to have to look into sort of how Jekyll and Hyde represent themselves, and then they're going to find quotes from the book that represent these qualities so they can play like a who said it game. And this is something that they can do at both levels, from the easier version of the text to the harder version of the text. At the bottom, I don't have to assign this assignment to all of my students. I can go to my groups. Now, this is a feature on myON that you're able to make as well. I've got my gifted and talented. So because I've got the higher level of the books in this assignment, I've made my gifted and talented group my students with the 4 to 12 ZPD. So I've just added this on as an extra caveat. You can just have the groups based on the ZPDs if you want as well. It's just an idea. And I can select all of my students and
The
I
students
could
don't see their grouping either, so don't worry that they can see the label or the ZPD range.
exactly. And once I publish this, this assignment is going to go to that group of students. I can do the same thing with my intervention students. So these are the students that are going to be reading those lower levels of the books.
Mm.
And I've labeled that within the name of the group, and I can give that assignment to those students. So it's very, very helpful for sort of differentiating that learning and making sure that every student's able to access the text, but also not feel like they're being sort of um, um, pointed out to the rest of the room. And they've also got like a few different students will be doing the same thing as them, especially if you're considering the reading range of the students and grouping them by that. So that is another way that you can sort of differentiate the learning by making these assignments and making them leveled. I'll hand back to Charlotte.
Thank you. And then as we come towards the end, we're going to talk a little bit about accelerated reader, and how that complements that differentiation of text within and across myON. So again, we've got those three texts within myON that we've just talked to you about. With an accelerated reader, you can find a quiz on each of those three versions. So again, the children who are your students who are accessing those books can then quiz on that book at the very end of that reading unit. However, we wanted to sort of highlight a few features within the accelerated reader platform that we think is great for that differentiation. Again, it's not just that we can quiz at the end of a book, but we'll talk to you a little bit about what else we can do with that in a moment. But within accelerated reader, you also have the vocabulary quizzes. And so you might want the kids to do the vocabulary quiz at the end, great, but why not print off the vocabulary list for each of the different versions of books ahead of the teaching period and hand those out? We can pre-teach the vocab, we can do defining matching, word matching activities. We can send these home for the parents to be aware of which vocabulary is coming up over the next term. You've got pronunciation examples. You can have obviously compare the vocabulary list from each of the three texts. And the children can be engaging with that, and you can use that as a teaching point. So the vocabulary lists are fantastic, and they're available within your Accelerated Reader platform. It's all part of the same thing. And as you can see, there's a PDF button there, which means you can then have that to save as PDF or to print off, which is great. You might also find that in the case of The Handmaid's Tale, there's only one version of this book. I don't think that actually the book is in myON, and then actually the book only has one single version on Accelerated Reader. So you might find that you need to, you've read this in class in physical, as a physical book. The level is a bit high for some of your children, and so you're going to need to create another quiz that's slightly easier for some of your students. Or, Emma and I discussed this yesterday, Handmaid's Tale, much like Jekyll and Hyde, they're long texts, they're long novels. And so, what are we going to do to support our students who haven't got the cognitive load to be able to recall and remember every element of the book at the very end? And you've been teaching it for weeks. So, let's create our own quizzes for chapters 1 to 7 and 7 to 14 and so on. So, we can break the book down into manageable chunks and review the understanding of our students periodically throughout the term to ensure that they are understanding what they are reading in the version that they are reading it. So we'll be able to double check that as well. Didn't know if you wanted to speak because you made this one, Emma, or I can cover it.
So yeah, just as Charlotte said there, obviously that we do have the option on Accelerated Reader to create quizzes. So Charlotte gave an example of using a text and just cutting it up into chunks and making quizzes for the first 1 to 4 chapters, 4 to 8 chapters, so that they're breaking down the text a little bit more for those students who are struggling to get through the text, even though they have to read it. And another idea that you could that you can use is, for example, if you just don't think that the quiz is the kind of questions that you wanted to focus on. So I made one earlier about Jekyll and Hyde, and I named it Miss Sloan's class. So I used Charlotte's name to differentiate it from the other versions of the quiz. And essentially, what happens is you will type all of your quiz questions in, and it pops up with an ATOS level, and also it'll give you the amount of points that you can get from the quiz. So what you can do is you can use the ATOS analyzer tool, which we've put at the bottom here. If you have a quiz or if you've made a quiz yourself, so each quiz has to have at least 4 answers. So you can type in your quiz on the ATOS analyzer, and then it'll pop out the ATOS level that that quiz actually is. So it'll analyze the language and it'll tell you what ATOS level that you have to put when you're creating your quiz. So how appropriate it's going to be for your students. You might run your quiz through the ATOS analyzer and find, oh, actually the language that I've used is a bit too high for these students based on their reading ranges. So then you're able to sort of edit it down and cut bits out. You could obviously use AI to sort of to get a simpler version of this quiz if you want to do several versions of the same quiz. And then when you're inputting it into Accelerated Reader, you give it a specific name so the students are able to find it. And then as the students are going through the quiz as well, you have the option to play it. So there is a voice also, regardless of the fact that you've made the quiz, there is a voice attached to the quiz as well. So again, giving another sort of extra layer of support to those students who might struggle with even the questions that you've made for them. So this can be a very helpful feature of Accelerated Reader that's actually underutilized, but it's something that I think a lot of us could agree that would be very, very helpful in the classroom.
Absolutely. And then finally, it's really important to, you might be now thinking, okay, well, we're using Accelerated Reader. We could do that. We could do it a couple of times a term. Every couple of chapters, I'm going to quiz the kids, make sure that they understand what they're reading. But we don't just use Accelerated Reader as a summative way of whether or not the children have understood our core text from this particular unit or from this particular study this academic year. We also need to be tracking the students' reading habits regularly. So we need to know what they're reading, how often they're reading and how accurate they are in their reading. And that really helps inform us in terms of which text we're putting in front of them. If we're looking at a set of our children and we can see that their accuracy is high and they're not reading enough, we need to be engaging the students. It doesn't take away from the fact that, and again, if you joined the webinar a few weeks ago with our colleagues, the importance of that 15 minutes a day, that's going to make sure those children are making the maximum amount of progress that they possibly can. And so we want the children outside of our lessons to still be engaging with reading in whichever way we can get them to. And so that's really important that we're not just tracking the text, the core text that we're focusing on, but that we have an awareness of where the children are broadly speaking across their engagement with reading. I saw someone's comment in the chat about a parent saying, "Well, my child can read all of the Harry Potter books." Emma and I actually joined a webinar recently with somebody that does a lot of research into lexicology and words and reading. And she mentioned that this exact thing that you've just mentioned, if a student is engaging with only one genre of books over and over and over, they're only encountering a really small percentage of words. And that seems so obvious, right? For me to say that now, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, obviously.
That author's
Yeah,
vocabulary, yeah.
but that means that that's so you could your response back to that parent is okay, but what else are they reading? Because okay, so they can just read the same words over and over and over and over and over. And naturally, within the Harry Potter series, we are aware that they started off very much more simple and they got a little bit darker towards the end. And so the vocabulary changes somewhat, but not hugely. How often are they reading the name Harry? And how often are they reading the word broomstick and so on and so on. The vocabulary remains quite unchanged. Thank you, Terry, for popping the ATOS analyzer into the chat there. It's a super resource. I run worksheets through there. You can run parent letters through there. You can run anything through to make sure the language is accessible to everybody. So good. But yeah, so just a reminder of the importance of tracking your child's reading broadly and not just specifically within your lesson, and then the importance of understanding what they can do and how they're doing with that.
Mm.
And so, oh, I'm on the wrong thing. So, we're now going to put another poll up for you to ask. We're now sort of come to the end of that. So, would you like to know any more about any of these products? Please let us know. I think Terry's going to pop a poll up on the screen to ask if you'd like any more information. Whatever you click on here will be sent to one of our systems, and it means that Emma, myself, our colleagues will be notified and we'll be able to get in touch with you to explore this with you more. If you have any more questions or you've
Yeah,
seen something today that you just think, I would like to go into more depth with Emma and Charlotte about that, or with my
absolutely.
education advisor, and it means we'll pick that
Exactly.
up with you.
Yeah, any of our customers who are currently on the call,
Hmm.
if you do want any of this shown to you, please just reach out.
Yeah.
And if you work with myself or Charlotte or any of the education advisors, they'll know how to do this. So
Yeah.
it's just be really helpful to yeah, just get a chat booked in about
Yeah.
it, and then you're able to use it. So you're able to use any of our products to like the fullest of their capabilities.
Hmm. For sure. And also, we'd love to hear from you if you're doing something that we haven't highlighted today and you wanted to provide that feedback to us to say this works well for us. Tell us. We love to learn from our schools and our colleagues across the world. And we'd be yeah, really keen to hear from you. Thank you. And then I think we're going to move on to just a final slide where we thank you for being with us today and hope you found if maybe you've had a single takeaway or something that you can use actionably in the next couple of days. And I think Terry's going to ask for a little bit of feedback. As ever, the feedback's super important. It means that we can do better next time. So any thoughts or things that we can improve on or things that you'd like to hear more about in the future. So I'll hand over to Terry now and stop sharing. Oh, stop.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you, Emma. That was a really informative session. Thank you, everyone that joined us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to log in live. As I mentioned, you will be sent an email in the coming days with the links, the recording, and a certificate of attendance. So do look out for that. As my colleague said, we will be doing a survey. So if you could take a few minutes just to add any feedback to that survey, that would be great. As you close down today's session, it will pop up. I've just also added it in the chat just a second ago. Again, thank you so much for joining. We will just stick around just in case there's any more
Well,
questions.
there's a few in the FAQ, so if anyone wants to stick around to hear their question answered, I'm happy to do them rapid fire now.
Yeah, do you want to do
If you've
them
got a few
now,
minutes.
Charlotte?
Super. So for Beatrix, thank you so much for your question. How important is reading with expression when reading out loud? Um, yes, a lot of your students are on lower reading level because of that. I would suggest that they would need sort of to be there still because the lack of expression means that there's a lack of depth in their understanding of the context of the story. So the ability to sort of add a voice or to adjust their intonation while they're reading means that they understand like the broader what's happening more broadly. So rather than just reading like a robot, they are sort of really soaking in the story, I would say. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, would you agree with that, Emma?
I would, yeah, I would say that obviously when you come into like questions and exclamation points and things like that, the
Mm,
students at least need to know what they're doing in regards to their
okay.
speaking when they are reading something like that. However, also um, reading aloud and reading are two separate skills. So
Yes.
I would say that obviously it is something to be taken into consideration, especially when you're using the recording function on the books. However, when it comes to reading, it's something that the two shouldn't necessarily be compared to each other, I would
Mhm.
say. But obviously, if you want to speak more about that, then I would definitely suggest to get in touch with an education advisor.
Yeah. And then Hannah, your question's dropped into the answered section and we hadn't yet. I'd clicked on it earlier. Do we have a book list of low-level books suitable for Key Stage 3? You're able to find that on our Book Find website, so we will link that as well in a moment. And you'll be able to use there's an advanced search function, and you can actually put in the interest level, as Emma mentioned before, with that lower ATOS level. So you'll be able to find and download those lists yourself. And if we aren't able to get the link in here now, reach out, we'll send it to you. Absolutely fine. I think
Yeah.
Hannah, you're possibly at one of Emma's schools anyway, so it'd be easy for
Yeah.
you to reach out.
Mhm.
How do you overcome children reading books they deem too young if they match their ZPD? Well, it's this high-low range really. So we could do some work with you on finding the books that are appropriate for your library, that are within your library, and then finding those higher interest level versus lower ZPD ranges. On my
Um,
own, can we search using Cepher numbers? We
so
used to
so
be
we
able to, didn't we?
Yeah, but we've taken it away at
Yeah.
recently because we found that the CFR levels weren't necessarily matching up. So at the moment, I don't think that the feature is available on there, but I think it's being worked on.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, we rapidly rushed through those questions. I'm aware you're all at the maybe the end of your day or the beginning of your day. You've got to get back to lessons, but thank you so much for all of your time. Any more questions, do reach out. We're very, very happy to support and to